pleasure to be here with you this afternoon, particularly during this period of commemoration, the 29th commemoration of genocide. It's for some of us who have been part of this journey for liberation, for the campaign against the genocide, this period brings us back to that period, and we get reminded of what we saw, what we witnessed, what we confronted, what we faced. Sometimes we get lost, and it's very difficult to imagine how we overcome or how we overcame that situation. I know this particular place very well because that's where I moved down towards the airport, Kabarebe, around this period. It was not easy. It wasn't easy. I cannot go through what we witnessed along the way. Heaps of dead bodies, children, women, young people, old, jumping over dead bodies, trying to rescue a few of them who are breathing, still breathing, others bleeding, helpless without knowing exactly what to do with them. It's not an easy situation to handle, especially at that period. But when you look at where we are today, then that's when you give credit to the most important thing as an ingredient to every success story. Leadership is central. Leadership is very important. At the end of the campaign to stop genocide, 1994, that is around the 4th of July 1994, the picture that I remember vividly of how things were, of how Kigali was, is very difficult to tell. Dead bodies littered all over the place. People still hiding in bushes here and there. Scavengers, these birds that scavenge on dead bodies of all over the world had converged here to Rwanda. Dogs that had been, let free, feasting, eating dead bodies here and there. No water, no food, no electricity. Gunpowder was the scent around the town. So it was a very, very difficult situation. And just before that, when fighting was still going on between the RPA and the genocidal forces, there were so many ideas that were being fronted as a solution to Rwanda, to the problem of Rwanda. Some people were saying Rwanda can never stand to manage itself. Therefore, the best solution would be to take parts of Rwanda and annex them to the nearest countries bordering it. Parts bordering Uganda be annexed to Uganda, parts next to bordering Tanzania be annexed to Tanzania, to Burundi and PRC and so forth. These were the ideas. Ideas related to a state that is failing. Others were advancing the idea that, well, now that the RPF had captured part of Rwanda, the west, the east, the north, and part of the southern of Kigali, Rwanda could be split into two parts. The eastern be occupied by the remaining Tutsi who are not dead. The western be occupied by Hutus. How that could be done, I don't know. But that was a demonstration of a state that is failing. There was no hope for Rwanda. There was no hope ever for Rwanda. But when we look at Rwanda today, where we have come from and where we are, we see things are possible. But one may ask, what happened that Rwanda stood up, confronted all these challenges, and moved on to where it is today? What is it? What is the magic behind it? What did Rwanda have? There was nothing after genocide. There was nothing. The whole government had collapsed. The population had been driven out, taken to the neighboring countries. All resources had been taken. The government's money, resources, everything had gone. There was nothing left. Even human resource had been finished. So what was remaining? Nothing. What we had was a few survivors, a few returnees from neighboring countries, internally displaced, militias still killing people left and right, a useless UN force around, NGOs that were part of the genocidal regime also around, doing nothing but, making the situation worse. So what did Rwanda have? What would we base on for us to stand and move on? Nothing. By any means, you will look at nothing. Nothing. There was nothing at hand. So what we had, in reality, in the truth, if we have to tell the truth, it's just a single leader that was capable of handling this very unfortunate situation and saying, no, Rwanda must move on. So when we strive to understand what leadership is, I think looking at where Rwanda has come from, where we are today, gives us a good answer to that. When the liberation struggle started in 1990, October, it was started by a handful of people, young people. The faculty dean mentioned it. Most of us were in our late 20s. In fact, I was in my late 20s, and others, most of them late 20s, or early 20s, for that matter. A handful of young people who had been refugees for many years in a neighboring country in Uganda, for 30 years, whose parents had been in exile for 30 years as refugees, tormented, harassed, with no future, with no hope of ever having a nation they call theirs, decided to desert, to disengage from the army they were serving, they had been in Uganda, and to invade Rwanda. For anybody who knows some basic military science, will say these people were adventurers. Will say these people were adventurers. How can a handful, hundreds of people, maybe 400 people on the first day, decide to invade a country that is, strong, that has allies, has friends, has an army, has assets, armor, Air Force and everything, and think they would win that war? It is very difficult to perceive that, but that's what happened. It's what happened. That's what happened. A handful of people in their hundreds, around 400, in October, 1st of October 1990, decided to launch a liberation struggle against Rwanda. It was suicidal. As I said, it was like adventurous because the military forces, the military capacities were not equal. The government was strong. We, the rebels, with a handful of arms, decided to fight what we thought was right. When the war started, in just about a week's time, the government of Rwanda was supported by powerful nations. The French came in with their force. They airlifted their force from Central African Republic. You know, the French usually have bases within their African former colonies. So the French came in. Mobutu, who was the leader of Zaire then, also sent in a big force, a division. The French, the Belgians, Mobutu's soldiers, plus the government forces, all converged on a few soldiers that had crossed over from Uganda, the Rwandese who disengaged from the Ugandan army and decided to come to liberate their country. They converged on us in the eastern part of Rwanda, near the border of Rwanda and Tanzania. Within just a matter of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, it looked like we would be annihilated. All our leaders, right from the topmost leader, the late General Fred Gisar Wijema, was killed, and other leaders were killed, plus many other soldiers, others wounded. So the situation was terribly bad. It looked like we would never succeed. It looked like we had lost the war completely. In military terms, we had lost the war. We were retreating. Others retreating to Tanzania, others back to Uganda. Others were being killed by all those forces I'm talking about. So all our hopes at that period were completely shattered. The idea was good, the vision was okay, we had come to liberate our country. But the circumstances were very difficult. So in about 2.5 weeks, His Excellency Paul Kagame, who was in the United States attending a military college, Fort Leavenworth College, military college, was following the situation on the ground. On learning that things had gone bad, that we had lost a lot of people, he decided to come. When he arrived at the battlefield, it was disastrous. All the fighters were demoralized. Others had been injured. There were no supplies. There was no plan. We were being defeated, annihilated generally. So even where to start from for him was a big challenge. It was a big challenge. So what he did was to try and withdraw the remaining fighters, dilapidated, emaciated, demoralized as they were, withdrew them back to close to the Ugandan border. And he embarked on relaunching the struggle according to his own plan, according to his own vision. That point in our struggle is the most difficult, is the most critical. Once we overcame that particular moment, that particular point in our history is when we say we would succeed. So, what did he come with? He did not come with any arms, he did not come with the troops, he did not come with anything. He just presented himself with his own way of leadership, with his own ways of dealing with things, difficult as it was. He gave hope, his coming gave hope that the struggle would continue and we would win the war. He started by asking a number of questions to some of the commanders he found. He asked them why they were being defeated, why they were being molested, why they were losing as if they had no cause to fight. They said the enemy was strong. He said the enemy can never be strong because what you are fighting for is much bigger than the strength of this enemy. What you call the enemy's strength is just an excuse for your own weaknesses. Let's do the right thing, and if we do the right things right, then we shall regain the war, we shall win this war. So that first part of his coming was devoted to sitting down with the soldiers, sitting down with the commanders, and communicating to them what he thought would help them win the war. And he indeed inculcated the most important values that would later become the basis for our success. A great sense of patriotism, a great sense of patriotism, the love for your country, that love for your country that would make you face the enemy, whichever enemy, because you were ready to die for your country. So the great sense of patriotism was imparted to all the fighters. All the fighters knew that it was not about themselves, it was about their country. So if they died in the course of the war, then they would have died for a noble cause. So this was a very important value that was inculcated to the fighters. He made them understand the essence of selflessness when you are fighting for a big cause, an unprecedented level of selfishness. If you are fighting for a big cause, for a stronger cause like we are fighting for, then being selfless was inevitable. He inculcated into them unparalleled charisma, valor, and courage. Courage, valor, charisma can also be imparted into people. It can be passed on to people. And this was well grasped by the commanders. The exhibition of great resilience, to be resilient under intense suffering and uncertainty. The situation, of course, was uncertain. The forces we were fighting for were much stronger from the beginning, at the beginning. So to be resilient under intense suffering was so much helpful for the fighters. Exhibiting high level of patience and keeping focus to the cause. Being consistent amidst insurmountable challenges. Making the right choices and sticking to them. Of course, using very little to achieve so much. We had so little. the only war material that we would use is that we would get from our enemy. If you defeated the enemy in a battle, the first thing you would go for is the gun or the bullets that you would use against him. So the economy of effort amidst the scarcity of almost everything was very important. Embracing discipline as an important weapon to fight and win the war was another value that helped us. Discipline as a weapon to fight and win the war. Adaptation and innovation as a means of survival amidst adversity. Adaptation. We had so many young people coming from different parts of this region, from Burundi, from Zaire, from Tanzania, from Uganda, people of different social classes. Others were intellectuals like you. Many were intellectuals like you. They had left school, high school, university, and most of them were required to commit what you may call class suicide. Class suicide. When I mean class suicide, you can imagine somebody, a lawyer, an engineer, a medical person, a doctor, coming to the war, the first month, the second month, the clothes he came with are all finished. He has no shoes to put on. He has nothing on his body, yet he's fighting. He's surviving. So people found themselves committing class suicide. You would never, at one point you would meet somebody and you think he never went to school anywhere, just because of the situation, the way it was. People found themselves committing like class suicide. So they had to adapt. They had to adapt to such conditions. They had to adapt to those conditions, but keep on fighting. Decisiveness, including taking big risks. Big risks. When you are a leader, you take decisions, you even take big risks. If those risks are in the interests of what you are fighting for, of what you want to achieve. So, during our struggle, many big risks were taken, decisive decisions were taken until, all of it gave us good results. Another important value that helped us along this journey was ideological clarity. Ideological clarity that distinguished us from our adversaries. Our adversary, the ideology was one. It was genocide ideology. It was killing these people. Whenever they captured our injured soldier, they would kill him. They would torture him to death. Whenever we captured an enemy soldier, wounded, we would carry him and treat him and incorporate him within our forces. And this, in a way, would help us to know more about the enemy, about his organization, about more information that we needed to use against him. So ideological clarity was another weapon that, helped us. Organizational superiority, to minimize losses and to outwit our enemy. In the absence of so much, the organizational superiority, the way the RPF was organized, the way the struggle was organized, to minimize the losses and use the literature that was available to our advantage was very important. We were more superior in organization. We saved the time, we cut losses, simply because we were better organized. The RPF had a well-defined vision, embraced by all fighters, and they kept focused to it. That's why, even in the face of genocide that we did not anticipate during the liberation struggle, the RPF kept focus to the Rwanda they thought they were fighting for, which is a united Rwanda, developing as we witness today. All the fighters understood the mission, and they had the desire to fulfill it. But the enabling factor to maintain all this environment, to ensure the success of the struggle, was the exceptional leadership of the leader of our president. Because in the absence of everything else that we didn't have, no support from anywhere, no superiority in arms, no experience, specialized experience of our officers, because most of our fighters were school leavers, were peasants, as I told you. So the exceptional wisdom of the leader was a very, very strong ingredient for the success of this struggle. After the liberation struggle and stopping of genocide in 1994, not all the government forces that had been on the side of the genocidal force fled to the next country, to Zaire. Most of them stayed behind. Most of them did not run away. They stayed. I remember around the 5th of July 1994, we had like 1,500 of them who reported to us. They surrendered to us. We received them. It is very difficult to imagine people that have been fighting on the opposing side being on the side of genocidal forces, when the whole country is littered with dead bodies of massacred Tutsis, and you have government forces that were on the other side, fighting on the other side, report to you, you receive them, and you integrate them there and then within your army. This, again, alludes to the ideological clarity, ideological strength that I was talking to. These former government forces were taken somewhere in the south of here, trained for maybe 2 months. They were integrated, given strong positions within the military and the police, gendarmerie, in the government, and they served with us. This was the beginning of Rwanda's journey into unity and reconciliation. And it served a very good purpose. It served a very good purpose. So, when we look at Rwanda's journey from the liberation time through fighting stop genocide and post-genocide reconstruction, what runs through, what Rwanda has throughout all these phases is nothing else other than leadership. just leadership, just the leader. So it's a typical example where a leader, a single leader, can change things, can embrace all those other factors that you would need to transform a country, to put right what you think should be right. So leadership in itself is a very complex thing to define and to, you may read books, you may read so many examples, but practicing leadership, I think, is a very difficult thing. But from Rwanda's journey, one can testify that leadership is a very important ingredient of everything that one would need to do. From my experience within this region where I have been, where I have worked, there are certain things you see and you really fail to understand what went wrong or what can't be done to fix some of the things. At one time I was in a meeting with other senior commanders within this region, and one Minister of Defense, I was Minister of Defense at that time, asked me one interesting question. He asked me why a rebel group called Lord Resistance Army moved from Uganda, traversed through DRC, and went to his country in the Central African Republic. It was a very interesting question. He said Rwanda is closer to Uganda. Why didn't the Lord Resistance Army move from Uganda to Rwanda, which is nearer? Why did it move from Uganda, traversing DRC, up to my country, Central African Republic? I had to think of what to answer to him. My answer to him was simple. I said, these people came to your country simply because you are not there. So because you are not there. If you were there, they wouldn't come. They wouldn't come. Where would they come to? Where would they pass? It's because you are absent. So if you are absent, then these people will come. So there is no other reason I could give him as to why the Lord Resistance Army decided to move up to Central African Republic. That comes to an issue of leadership. That comes to an issue of leadership. When there is absence of leadership, everything else happens. In our experience within this region, we have been to almost many countries, Uganda, Rwanda, Zaire. When we went to Zaire in 1996, in the war against the genocidal forces, which culminated into fighting and removing Mobutu from power. Mobutu had been the leader, the ruler of Congo for many years, from maybe 1963 up to 1996, 97. But what was remaining of Zaire, when we crossed over into Zaire, what was remaining of Zaire? I can only summarize it into three things that I witnessed that were remaining of Zaire by 1997. One, the only thing that remained of Zaire that I can say there was the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church was the only remaining institution strong. The Catholic Church. What else? Another one could have been the traditional chiefs. The traditional chiefs. They have traditional chiefs. Every ethnic group has a traditional chiefs. That institution also existed. Another very interesting but very strong institution that existed in the country was witchcraft. Because in the absence of everything else, in the absence of justice, in the absence of local leadership, in the absence of local administration, in the absence of the army, of the police, it's the witchcraft that prevailed. You would not do anything bad to your neighbor. You would not steal from your neighbor. You would not, fight your neighbor. You would not steal from your neighbor. Otherwise, you would be bewitched. Therefore, witchcraft takes precedence. And it becomes a big institution. So for countries to collapse, to degenerate up to that level, where you have a huge country with so much resource, everything, and you only have the Catholic Church, the local chiefs, traditional chiefs, and witchcraft remaining, then that becomes a big problem. So for the young people, the young leaders, every generation, youth of every generation lives in an environment and circumstances that shape them and influence their thinking. Every youth, every generation lives in an environment that shapes its thinking. Today's youth live in a post-genocide Rwanda. Even foreigners who are here, Africans, we assume you are under this environment. The post-genocide Rwanda, under the leadership of President Paul Kagame, it will definitely shape you, influence you, and the strategic environment he has created that Rwanda operates in should also influence your thinking. The strategic environment of national unity and reconciliation, institution building, good governance, rule of law and justice, fighting corruption, socio-economic development, thinking big, being one, and being accountable. This environment, as the youth, should shape you. My generation and my youthhood and others, we were influenced by the conditions and the circumstances we lived in. As refugees for many years in foreign countries, this influenced our thinking. The bipolar world politics of the East and the West, the Cold War at that time, it influenced us, it influenced our thinking. We grew up when the post-colonial governments were being challenged, left and right. So many coups d'etats. In Uganda, coup d'etat. In Rwanda, coup d'etat. In Burundi, coup d'etat. In Nigeria, General Gowon. Bokassa, in the Central African Republic. In Egypt, in Sudan. There were a lot of coup d'etats. The post-colonial governments were being challenged at that time. We grew up when there was this agitation to fight to liberate the Southern Africa from apartheid. From apartheid. There was this struggle to the frontline states united under Mwalimu Julius Nyerere, struggling to fight the apartheid. So all of this inspired us. All of this inspired us. So we grew up as an embattled youth, oppressed, rebellious, and we only needed one small thing to trigger us, to ignite our anger, to be able to come and liberate our own country. So when it happened in 1990, when we got the chance to disengage from Uganda, we seized the opportunity to steal the guns and come to liberate our own country. Even in those days at school, we were more interested with anything that alluded to rebellion, to being rebellious, interested us so much. There is nothing much I remember about my secondary school because it's so much long ago. But I only remember one single secondary school teacher, and I remember his name. He was called Francis Okero. He moved into class with a novel, waving a novel, a small novel, a very small novel, written by George Orwell. It's called Animal Farm. And in introducing the novel Animal Farm, this is maybe 1974, 75. In introducing the Animal Farm, he said, "Gentlemen, Animal Farm is a novel where animals are used as human beings to demonstrate a political demagogue." I was very interested. And in reading the novel, it is about animals rebelling against each other because they are oppressed. I said, this is my thing. So this is where we were most interested. This is what inspired us. This is what we were interested in. Because we were already rebellious. We only needed something to, ignite our anger. And then I had the chance to attend one debating class of our senior 6 people. There was this very good student, a debater, he was called Karuhanga. And the debate was about apartheid. I remember his words. He said, "Apartheid, ladies and gentlemen, is a hangover of the past, an anachronism which but nurtures both a social and political miasma." That stuck. I picked apartheid. So for us, that was the environment that shaped us. We read Franz Fanon, we read this and that, we read Mao Zedong, we read. So the circumstances that we live in today, the global world, the globalized world, the digital world, it must shape you. It must shape you if you have to survive. If you have to survive. The global world is like, when we talk about globalization, what do we mean? Globalization means like one thing. Globalization means that the world is like this room. It's like we are all together in this room. We are no longer far apart. We are in this room. If we are together in this room, we are going to compete within this room. We must compete. If it is a field to cultivate, we are going to compete to cultivate. Whoever will cultivate more, bigger chunk, do better, will feed. The one who doesn't will starve. Therefore, let's assume America will come in this room, China will come in this room, Japan, South Korea, everybody else, European countries and Africans. So Americans And those others, developed ones, will come to this room with tractors, fertilizers, combine harvesters, and everything. So we are all competing to cultivate in this room to feed. We, the Africans, will come to this room with a hoe to till. By the time you till 1 meter with your hoe, the American will have finished the whole room, irrigated, added fertilizers, used the combine harvesters, harvested, stored. The next day, he will be sending you the corn, the maize, through UNDP, United Food or whatever, World Food Program. Through World Food Program. This is what the world is about. This is what globalization means. So, for the next generation, if you have to survive, you have to seize the opportunity of this global world, the good thing, internet, connectivity, whatever, the IT. It's now universal. There is nobody now who has the monopoly over certain tools that are needed for people to enhance themselves. So it's up to us. There are challenges, but there are also opportunities. There are also examples of leadership. If you live here in Rwanda, you will not need to go very far to search and look for the best examples of leadership, of whatever, whichever book. The book is here. The book is President Kagame. Just study President Kagame from the beginning, from the time he comes in 1990, 2 weeks after the liberation struggle has failed, when so many people have died, when all the fighters have deserted, when almost everybody has given up, and he organizes people single-handedly from nothing, with nothing, builds them into a force that within 4 years is capable of liberating the country and stopping the genocide. By the time the RPA moved from northern Rwanda, where it was based, to come and stop genocide, the RPA was 21,000 troops. The government forces were 50,000, plus gendarmerie, which was 30,000, plus close to more than 1 million militias. That was a big force to confront with. By numbers, it was not possible. It's because these people were foolish. In fact, if the genocidal regime decided to bring the militia forces, troops, together with the government fighting forces to confront the RPA, they would have overrun us. It's a question of numbers. It's about numbers. We were 21,000. They were 1 million. You cannot fight 1 million people. It's difficult. Just because of their ideological bankruptcy, they used much of their force, in the army, the gendarmerie, the genocide forces, to look for innocent people and kill them. That's how they were defeated. That is how they were defeated. They were defeated because they scattered their efforts looking for innocent people to kill. But if they moved all that force and concentrated it on the RPA to fight us, they would have overrun us just by their numbers. Just by their numbers. So, everything is about leadership. Everything is about leadership. There is nowhere you will search for the best examples. They are there. We study about Singapore, we study about this and that. But your presence here in Rwanda gives you the opportunity to look at where Rwanda has come from, where Rwanda is today, and what has enabled it. The enabling factor is no other than the presence of one single individual. We shouldn't go left and right about this. That is true. That is true. That is true. I remember the first government after the genocide was put in place on 19th of July 1994, and the composition of that was part of the RPF, yes, the RPF, but also some individuals who had survived the genocide, even politicians from opposition parties who had survived the genocide. They had nothing. They had no cars, they had no clothes, basically they had nothing. No communication, but they started from scratch. The only institution that survived, the only institution that was in place was the RPA. That is the Rwandese Patriotic Army that had stopped genocide. It was the only single institution, no other institution in the country. And that single institution enabled all these other institutions later to be formed around the new government. But that institution managed to do so because, as I said, that institution had been tested through all those experiences of the Liberation War. It had within itself cadres. It embraced all these values I talked about. And that's how Rwanda picked up. That's how we survived from being divided into two, one part for Tutsi, one part for Hutu. That's how we survived being annexed to our neighboring countries, because we could not be a viable country, as they said. And today, Rwanda is moving. So, never underestimate the quality, the caliber of a strong leader, of leadership. And the best example, I think you can pick it from the experience that, the environment that you live in today. I thank you.